Forspoken from Square Enix, a sort of Final Fantasy adjacent open world RPG that was released to much hullabaloo within the last month, and a lot of weird conversation around this game, both long before it was released and since it has been. And I am, by my estimations, obviously, without having finished it, I can't know how close I am to the end, but I would guess about halfway through the main story, while also having done quite a bit of running around in the side questing. I've played about 20 hours of the game, and so these are not my final thoughts. This is not my final review of the product, which I will do at the end, but I felt like I had enough experience now with the game to at the very least address a few of the big things that I've seen up front, most especially kind of the narrative swirling around on Twitter and some of the things that I saw in the early reviews that came out, and give you my take on the big talking points, as it were, so that my final review can be a lot more about how much the story and gameplay and those things kind of resonated with me. So let's begin with, I'm not going to talk about the, quote, woke stuff, right? Because I know who my audience is. If you're a patron, if you're here hanging out, right, we're long past that particular argument. We know there are people out there who didn't like this game because it happens to star a black woman, and there's really nothing in this particular conversation we can do or say to those people other than say, obviously, they're wrong, and it's very, very frustrating. And the one thing I will say is I feel like you can see some of the ways in which that bias snuck into even certain reviews. And I've often said this. Bias in journalism isn't about, people don't make up stories. Not nearly as often as the general audience thinks. People aren't really paid for reviews. Those kinds of things are just conspiratorial for me, right? Most often, the bias comes from, and I say this as someone who's watched it happen from every step of the way in the sports journalism community, comes from basically what you leave out, right? And what I saw happening with a lot of these Forspoken reviews was that the game itself took a sort of backseat to this weird conversation about the dialogue, the main character, and the story, which I agree are all important parts of a game, but they felt elevated to a point in the conversation about Forspoken where I really felt like some biases were showing through, where it was clear there were some people who were just predisposed to not like this game for any number of reasons, whether it's bias against black women or this style of writing or a combination of these things. There was a lot that didn't really have anything to do with the game itself. And so I'm here to tell you that, yes, as you could probably guess from either seeing several of my tweets or conversation in the Discord or just knowing how I generally respond to things like this, I really, really, really am loving my experience with Forspoken so far. When it comes to the dialogue, this is a really interesting conversation to me that's almost worthy of another conversation and podcast all on its own, because I've seen a lot of people pulling the MCU into this whole thing, right? There is clearly a crowd of people out there now who don't like a style of writing that essentially tries to equal parts take itself seriously enough that they can get us to cry at Infinity War and Endgame, right? But it's also constantly got Iron Man and Spider-Man rocking quips and jokes and sarcastic remarks back and forth, even when the world is about to come to an end, right? And for some people, they just hate that. I posted in the Discord a little while back this review of Marvel's Midnight Suns, where this person just went in on not only do they hate that style of storytelling and that writing, but they hate the people who like that kind of storytelling and writing. Like it was really amazing to see someone just open up and admit to like this just profound loathing of this thing, which I find really odd because, again, it's fine if it's not your thing. And I get it because it is more prevalent these days. It's worked really well in the MCU. Elements of it. I have long battled back against this. Like, I used to be the DC fan getting mad at people saying, hey, not everything has to be Marvel. Not everything has to have jokes in it, right? So I 100% get the poll to be like, everything shouldn't have to be Marvel. That said, there's nothing illegitimate about the writing style. That's ridiculous, right? Of course. And so, where some people would look at Forspoken and say, well, it's a Marvel style of writing, and that's apparently automatically bad now, and we're automatically giving things bad marks for it, I guess, starting now with Forspoken, right? I mean, I could point out that Black Panther and Wakanda Forever are MCU projects. I could point out that Spider-Man No Way Home is an MCU project, and none of those things are even close to poorly written. And if we just want to branch it out to Marvel, then I can start talking to you about Logan and some of the better written comic books, right? So let's not even go there. What I would say about Forspoken and the way that it's written is take that concept and just turn it into a positive. If you really do hate that style, then yeah, Forspoken's probably going to rub you the wrong way. It's got a lot of that. It's got fray and cuff, quipping back and forth, being sarcastic, being borderline rude to each other, but in a way that is meant to be almost like a sibling rivalry type of thing that they've got going on. The writing is not under any circumstances poor. It just isn't. Look, man, I've seen a lot of television. I've watched a lot of movies. I've played a lot of video games. I have seen some bad writing, especially in video games. Man, the first several generations of video games, even some of my favorites. Go and listen to the Final Fantasy podcast where Ira and I will make fun of some of those early, we try to understand the era that it was in, but there's a lot of clunky writing throughout the history of video games. This isn't any of that, right? Like I said, the last game I poured a ton of time into was Marvel's Midnight Sun. So how ironic, right, that I've actually got two games, and they do have a similar kind of, there's big stakes, there's a big world, there's a lot of over-the-top stuff, there's a lot of humor involved, but then it'll shift tone really quickly and want you to take it seriously. And I guess for some people, they just can't do that. If you're going to be quipping jokes, you better be a cartoon. And if you're going to have an art style that and a story that's maybe a little bit more serious in its undertones, then I guess you're not allowed to do this other thing. I don't understand this. I just have to say I don't get this dynamic at all. It's one thing if it's not for you. It's another thing to try to say that anything written this way is poorly done, right? I wouldn't say that about Westerns or anime or, things like that. So for anyone listening to this, I got 20 hours in this thing. If you have ever enjoyed Marvel, so is it poetry? Is it, Game of Thrones quality? Would I nominate it for the best written script of any video game that I've played in the last year? Probably not. It gets the job done. It's not blowing my mind. There have been several times I've chuckled, several times I've laughed out loud, and so far 3 or 4 moments in the story that have gotten me very emotional. It's a good story with a great, fun, and interesting world, and it's not written poorly. In fact, I would give it a solid B in the writing category. It's doing the job. I'm not bumping on it. If anything, my biggest critique about the writing is that they repeat the quips while you're out running around with the cuff. They'll say the same things kind of over and over and over again. And I think you can turn it off or turn it down. I haven't bothered to mess with it because only recently have I started to notice some of the repetitions. Like, okay, you've said that one 3 or 4, 5 times now. So, but beyond that, the content of it is very, very good, I would say. And certainly even above average for your typical video game these days, or even JRPG if you want to put it into that classification, which is something I know a little bit more about, right? So that's all I can really do on the story so far. I mean, I love the character. Honestly, that's one of those things that's going to be entirely subjective, and why it's so frustrating that so many of the reviews focused on the main character and the dialogue, since those things are far more subjective. I can already see the story going to far more interesting places than I saw a lot of people giving it credit for. It's already done more interesting things than certain standard isekai, and I love a good isekai. And so, yeah, anyway, that's what I've got for you on the story. One other, I guess, production note before I move into the general playing of the game is that the music is phenomenal. I've seen a couple people, oddly enough, suggesting that the music and I saw this in reviews, more than one. It was like, and the music is just kind of bleh. And I'm just like, now I feel like you're looking for stuff to just say to justify some of these low scores you're giving it. Because, look, this may not be Bear McCreary's greatest score ever. He's done some phenomenal things for God of War and Rings of Power and plenty of other. I talked about him a lot in the Nerdy Emmys when I nominated him there for Rings of Power. But the music in Forspoken is so damn good. And it's got this really cool, interesting mix of like the kind of fantasy, sort of medieval inspired orchestral scores that we think about and are used to in this cool like hip hop vibe that, yeah, maybe that's a little on the nose and we get into all that. But just from the sound of the music, it's just cool. It's so good. I really, really love the music, and I find myself humming its various themes and variations on its main theme quite a bit. So I wanted to point that out. Now, from the playing of the game standpoint, oh, damn it, Drew, you got one more production note on here you do have to talk about. And really, this is the end of the critiquing section as well. Let's talk about the visuals. This is another thing where I feel like people have chosen to focus on the legitimately rough parts and totally ignore the incredible parts, right? So from a visual standpoint, I will say this. The character models are rough to look at. Now, I've repeated this a couple of times and had a few people push back on it. And fair enough. If they're doing it for you, and that's fine. And there is an interesting conversation to be had about, look, you can't compare. Obviously, nothing compares to things like Horizon Forbidden West and where like God of War Ragnarok have gone, right? It's obviously not on that level. I do think that it's a little bit frustrating because I feel like it's so close. And I would even argue that the face models for like the main cast of Final Fantasy 15, they may have slightly less fidelity, but they look better. They're less distracting. Now those are a little more anime-y, and these people I think are supposed to look a little more realistic in the world of Forspoken. But ultimately, I do think it's unfortunate that the main character models, and certainly the NPCs, don't look great, especially in the face, which is where you're going to be looking most of the time while they're talking, right? Now, I haven't found that that's made it harder for me. Again, somebody who grew up on JRPGs and back when these characters were all like pixelated, right? I can still fall in love with a character that looks kind of weird and off, right? So I'm still very much enjoying the cast and getting in on it. It hasn't proved to be a barrier to me at all. But I can understand how for an audience that really wants to fall in love with the characters in that way, the fact that sometimes when they talk like they look a bit wonky, it can be problematic, and I totally get that. And it's one of those things where if you are trying to objectively score something, right, you've got to knock off a few points in graphics because it's not state-of-the-art graphically from that standpoint. However, to reach the conclusion that this is an ugly video game is to, I think, so completely miss where obviously the development team put the vast majority of their time and focus, which was into creating this enormous and beautiful world to explore. Now, those of you that know me know I'm not a big open world gamer. I love Horizon Forbidden West, and Zero Dawn. I love Horizon because of the story and the characters and all of that, but I play those games almost completely linearly, right? For Forbidden West, I got more into doing the side stuff because it was so well done. But similarly to what Forbidden West did, which was give you the option to do either, Forspoken does that. And for me, for my money, this is going to sound wild. Now, this is for a specific kind of person. Forspoken is my most favoritist paced open world game of all time because it so clearly gives you these big zones to go and play in and explore and do at your own time, but then it also gives you a very clear linear path to follow if that's what you want to do. So my wife, Katie, who is loving the story, by the way, and has multiple times asked me if I could play this game, she wants to see all the main story stuff. So if she's not home, though, and I feel like, hey, I've got an hour for lunch, I'm going to go play a little Forspoken, I can run around in the open world, maybe go get a cloak, go get a necklace, go get a little stat upgrade, run through a little side quest, do a little battle mission, whatever I'm going to do, And then when she's ready to go on in the story, there's just a very clear delineation between side quest and story. Now, for some people, they don't like that. For some people, they want the Elden Ring, Red Dead experience where you're wandering around and side quests just happen and everything is organic. And I totally understand the appeal to that. I think Breath of Wild or these kinds of things have a similar appeal where it's like, everything is organically tied together, and so there is no separation between side quests and main story. Everything is just a part of a living, breathing world, and it's like, that's cool, and that's neat. But I have a real-world life, and it's like I have to separate times when I'm just running around, goofing off, playing a video game and fighting zombies, and when I'm pushing through a story because my wife and I are enjoying an experience together. And Forspoken so perfectly allows me to do that I just want to stand and applaud it. And one of the big elements of that I think just isn't being made a big enough deal, it's like people got over magical parkour before the game even came out. And I just want to stand up and scream magical parkour every time I see people like totally underrating this game. Because for me, now 20 hours into this is my favorite traversal system of all time in any video game ever. Again, I'm not a big fan of open world games. And oftentimes one of the reasons why is all of the running back and forth, the backtracking, the traveling. Even once games like the second Horizon game gives you the glider and whatnot, right? It makes it a lot better. And I love riding around on the horses or whatever robot thing you can get to ride around on for a little while. But after a little while, in even the best open world games, or and then there are some of these other linear games, we're saying Final Fantasy VII Remake, exploration and running around a traversal isn't really a huge part of having fun in that game, right? It's not a part of and that's fine. But in Forspoken, man, I could run around and backflip off of mountains and fire whip off of literally anything, like your Spider-Man, but with a fire whip, skating around on your ice skateboard. Like, it's just so much fun. And with how massive the world is, it's like it doesn't ever feel like anything is in your way. And I think for me in a lot of games, that there's always that frustration of like, I can't jump up on there. Oh, there's an invisible wall there. Oh, I see the thing is at the top of the mountain. Great. I got to figure out how to run around and get up top. And I'm going to spend the next 5 minutes, 10 minutes of gameplay time just trying to figure out what I'm supposed to do, right? Where the game wants me to go. And Forspoken just forgoes all of that and instead allows you to just magically backflip your way to just about anywhere you need to go. And if you see something that's way down beneath you, then flip your ass on down there and hang on to something and you're going to be fine. Like, it's so freeing to be like, I see a thing, I'm just going to run toward it. And anything that fights me on the way, I'm going to fight it on the way. And so it's wild to me because I would give the traversal system, which isn't even something you normally, I guess, grade video games on, like a 10 out of 10, 20 out of 10. I love it so much. It took like my least favorite part of this type of game, which is the running around in the world and exploring, which I tend to find more cumbersome and meticulous than fun and interesting, and made it so fun and interesting. And then the other thing is the combat system that I have to say, folks, this is the part where I'm truly baffled, because I have spent most of my life as a proselytizer of Final Fantasy. And when it comes down to arguing greatest of all times or greatest of the year or whatever, right, longtime rivals in these categories are, of course, Mario and Zelda. They've all been there from the very beginning. They remain relevant to this day. Great franchises. And whenever it seems like a Final Fantasy comes directly up against a Mario or a Zelda in a conversation, those other games win because gameplay matters more than story. These are games. They're not books. They're not movies. They're not television shows. They're games. And while I have always been of the opinion that a set of gameplay mechanics has never changed my life, it's never made my life better, it's never informed who I am as a person, where several video game stories have. And so I find a great and profound story to be more important than a great gameplay system, even if the medium is video games. I always understood the argument, right? I always understood, okay, fine. Final Fantasy can come in second place or third place to Zelda and Mario because those are the great gamey games, even if they aren't, really reaching for that philosophical touch in your soul, making you cry stuff. Although Zelda sometimes. So now we get to this place where a game like Forspoken comes along in an era where people bemoan that everything is samey-same. Everything is a hack and slash. Everything is hack, slash, roll, dodge, heal, hack, slash, roll, dodge, heal. Right? Thank you, Kingdom Hearts. Right? Everything is a big AAA open world action RPG, which this is, right? But most of them play very similarly. The FromSoft Dark Souls games seem to have separated themselves by creating a different way to play them. And I don't understand why this game isn't being given that same kind of credit. For me, Forspoken, now y'all know I said Horizon Forbidden West was my favorite game of last year and my favorite game that I've played in a very, very long time that's not a Final Fantasy, right? Forspoken's not better than Horizon Forbidden West. It's not. It would have to have an insane second half to beat out Horizon Forbidden West for me. But I'm having more fun with the combat in Forspoken than I ever did in Horizon. I find the combat in Forspoken to be insanely satisfying, both in terms of how many different combinations of things that you can do with all the different magic, how unique it is. Again, it's not a hack and slash thing. You don't even have a sword, right? There's no swords, there's no guns. There are things that resemble swords and guns. They have a unique way, but it's all magic, which does set Forspoken apart. It's not samey-same. It doesn't feel like playing any other video game that I've played, and it's incredibly satisfying to combine the magical parkour, the different magic styles, the support stuff with the attack stuff, and just the fluidity of the combat to be flipping around off of stuff. And it's just so much fun. It's entertaining to watch. Again, my wife Katie, who oftentimes when I'm playing games like a Horizon, she's not watching the gameplay at all. She checks in when a cutscene starts. With Forspoken, she can't look away from the gameplay because, I mean, not to oversimplify it, folks, but flips and particle effects and magic everywhere. It's like, I feel like in some ways this has gotten so overcomplicated. In some ways it's been so oversimplified. It's like, it's a great, great combat system. I don't understand why the game isn't getting more credit for that. The traversal system, the open world, which is just incredibly fun to explore and absolutely massive, but it doesn't feel intimidating to me the way even games like Skyrim did because of the parkour, because of the fact that you can navigate it with such remarkable ease. Like you're Spider-Man, but you don't need skyscrapers to swing off of. You can just go anywhere with a remarkable grace. And I just see the dog is upset too, or excited, one or the other. So yeah, that's it for now. Like I said, I'm going to have full thoughts, and as most of you know, I don't really do scores, but I might actually have to for this one, or at least give you a general idea, because just seeing, again, how it's reviewed, and I may even talk specifically about a couple of reviews, it's really strange to me that so many people have come to such a completely different conclusion about this game that it just doesn't even match up at all with what I've experienced here. So for the people who tend to enjoy the kinds of things that I do, the people who are likely to be listening to this because you're patrons and all that good stuff, I do highly recommend picking this game up if and when you can. I totally understand how with some of the reviews and with some of the visual stuff, and especially if you're a PC player, I've heard that it doesn't run super great on PC. Obviously, I'm playing on PS5. Also, I know there's a lot of people that don't have a PS5, so I totally get that. But once it goes on sale, if and when you do have a PS5, all of that stuff, I do recommend checking out this game and playing it for yourself. I think for the people who are into the kinds of things we discuss here on this channel, Final Fantasy and Lord of the Rings and Star Wars and Marvel and DC, it's right in that wheelhouse. It's fun and good and also emotional and uplifting and inspirational and all those things, like a lot of the kinds of stuff that we talk about here. So yes, it may be, quote, cringe to some people, and apparently cringe is enough of a reason to give a game with phenomenal gameplay a 6 out of 10 or something. But yeah, for me, not even close. Not my game of the year, probably. Absolutely not a 10 out of a 10. But highly, highly recommend Forspoken to just about anybody around here. So thank you all for listening into this episode. If you have played the game, let me know what you think. If you haven't yet, I'd also love to know what you think. If you're thinking about picking it up, if you have any other questions for me regarding the game that I haven't gotten to yet, because I will, again, be returning to this once I have completed it. So thank you so much for listening into this episode of DC Talks. I've been your host, Drew Kreisman. You have been absolutely awesome,